You ever notice how we're obsessed with generational labels? Boomers, millennials, Gen Z, they all get talked about constantly. But sandwiched in the middle, there's this whole generation nobody seems to notice. Generation X. They're the coworker who gets everything done without making noise about it. The ones who built a huge part of the world we live in, but barely have a social media presence. And here's what's fascinating. Their psychology is maybe one of the most misunderstood of any generation alive. This isn't just history, it's a look at the programming that created a generation of silent operators. Let's start with what defined them more than anything. They were latchkey kids. And I don't mean a few of them let themselves in after school. This was a new normal. Picture this, it's the early 1980s, you're a kid. The school bus drops you off, you walk to your house, pull out that key hanging from a shoelace around your neck, and let yourself into an empty home. No parents. No babysitter. No cell phone to call for help, no GPS tracker, no Ring camera on the door, you're just alone. By the middle of the decade, reports estimated that millions of children were regularly unsupervised after school. This wasn't a parenting trend, it was economic reality. Divorce rates had climbed, and for the first time, a huge number of mothers were entering the workforce. The result was a quiet, nationwide experiment in radical self-reliance. Think about what that does to you. If you burn the toast, you deal with the smoke. If you fall off your bike, you limp home. There was no adult buffer between action and consequence. Psychologists might call this a high-contingency environment. It's a sterile term for a profound reality. Your brain gets wired to think 2-3 steps ahead, because you have to. That quiet manager who has a backup plan for the backup plan. They aren't being pessimistic. They're running a survival program that's been installed since they were 9.
But here's where it gets darker. Gen X watched their parents preach one thing and live another. All this talk about loyalty, commitment, and career stability. But what they saw was the collapse of those systems. They were one of the first generations where having divorced parents became common. They watched their parents give decades to a company, only to come home one day with their job packed in a cardboard box, casualties of downsizing and restructuring. The message landed hard: the system will betray you. Institutions are not reliable. Psychologists have a term for the mindset this creates: defensive pessimism. But Gen X just calls it Tuesday. It's not a belief that things will go wrong, but the data-driven conclusion that they probably will, because history suggests they often do. So you hope for the best, but you plan for the absolute worst. This isn't cynicism, it's pattern recognition. It's a suit of armor against the shock of disappointment. The famous whatever isn't apathy. It's a mantra of emotional self-preservation. Then there's the irony. Gen X weaponized ironic detachment. Where did this come from? Try growing up during the last, tense act of the Cold War. They were surrounded by a strange cognitive dissonance. The adults in their lives acted like total annihilation could happen any random Tuesday, while also insisting everything was fine. Gen X kids were shown movies like The Day After in school, which graphically depicted a nuclear holocaust, and then were expected to go home and do their homework. When you're raised in that kind of split reality, you learn to laugh so you don't scream. Irony became a shield. Sarcasm was a pressure release valve. It's the root of the slacker persona. Keep it light, keep moving. Don't let anyone see you care too much. Because caring too much in a world that seems absurd is a fool's game. This is exactly why their relationship with social media is so different.
It's not because they don't get the technology. Remember, many of them helped build the very architecture of the internet. It's because they grew up when privacy was the default state. If you did something embarrassing at a party, maybe a few people knew. By next week, it was forgotten. There was no permanent digital record. To a mind shaped by that, broadcasting your life online doesn't feel liberating. It feels dangerous, exposed, and vulnerable. They learned early that the less people know about you, the safer you are. So they watch. They lurk. They use it as a tool. But they often resist becoming the product. Because they remember what privacy felt like. And they're not eager to trade it for likes. Despite all this, the neglect, the instability, Gen X developed one of the most interesting work ethics. They were mislabeled as slackers, but in reality, they're obsessed with work.
Not with loyalty like their parents, or purpose like millennials. They're obsessed with competence.
For many, their first jobs weren't prestigious internships. They were paper routes at dawn, bagging groceries, or working fast food registers where you had to make change in your head under pressure. They were raw, unfiltered introductions to responsibility. Having watched their parents get wrecked by corporate promises, they never bought into company loyalty. So, they adopted a different survival strategy. They couldn't control the economy, but they could control their own value. Their entire career philosophy became about being quietly indispensable. Now, let's talk about authority, because their relationship with it is complicated. Gen X respects competence, not titles. If a leader has earned their stripes and knows what they're doing, they'll follow them anywhere. But they have zero patience for an executive who just speaks in buzzwords. They won't confront them, that's too much drama. Instead, they'll smile, nod, and quietly work around them to get the job done right.
They don't need the credit, they just need it to work. There's this paradox at the core of Gen X. They are fiercely independent, but also quietly collaborative. The independence is easy to see. They've been solving their own problems since they were 8. As adults, asking for help can feel like a personal failure. A Gen Xer might spend 6 hours on a simple repair before calling a professional. Not to save money, but because they feel they should be able to handle it themselves. But here's the other side of it. While they'll never ask for help, they are the first to show up when you need it. And they do it with a unique, drama-free efficiency. If your car breaks down, they just appear. If there's a crisis, they're the ones quietly arranging logistics. No long post about their good deed. They just do it. This comes from learning to rely on your peers when the adults were absent. You handle your own stuff, but you always show up for your people.
If there's one metaphor for this generation, it's a bridge. They have one foot in the analog world of their parents, and the other in the digital future of their kids. They are the last generation to remember a world where information had physical weight, where you had to hunt through a card catalog in a library. They learned to fix things with their hands, bike chains, VCRs, because there was no YouTube tutorial. At the same time, they were the pioneers of the digital world, the first to hear that dial-up modem screech. They aren't digital natives, but they're not digital tourists either. They're technologically bilingual. This bridge status now defines their central anxiety as parents. Having grown up with so little supervision, many reacted by giving their own children the attention they never had. But now they look at a world of hyper-scheduled, digitally tracked childhoods, and they have a secret fear. In protecting their kids from the hardships that made them resilient, have they accidentally made them soft? Here's the truth. Generation X is the product of a unique historical gap, a time when the old world was dying, and the new one hadn't quite been born. They were raised without applause, and as a result, they never learned to need it. They are the shock absorbers of society, quietly translating between the analog and the digital, holding things together. Their legacy won't be in loud manifestos, it's in the stable systems they maintain and the problems they solve before anyone else notices. And honestly, the most Gen X thing of all might be this. They don't really care if you notice. They just want to get the job done and move on to the next one. If this resonated with you, if you're a Gen Xer who felt seen, or if you're from another generation and you finally understand your parents or that quiet coworker, consider subscribing. I appreciate you being here.